morning heard the sound of a nation warring going on.
Boom shakalaka, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters around the world. It is your chocolate Nubian soul brother, Chris Schul, aka the Esoteric Noetic, aka the Bitcoin MC. And you know what I'm talking about, Bitcoin? What am I talking about? I'm talking about Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin. I'm talking about Bitcoin Cash. I'm talking about BCH. Speaking of Satoshi Nakamoto, speaking about interesting guests, I have a very interesting guest coming on tonight, waiting ever so patiently. Dr. Craig Wright, Professor Faustus, one of the most enigmatic, charismatic, controversial figures in the world of Bitcoin, here tonight on the Chris Schul Journey podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight into this. Now, I'm pretty new to using Skype, so hopefully the winds of Satoshi shall guide me tonight. Won't have any problems, but let's get into this. Y'all ready for this one? Of course you are. Let's rock. Dr. Wright, it is an absolute pleasure. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. You're coming in loud and clear. The video is very good. Best have had it, actually. Must have some pretty high-tech equipment down there.
Everywhere.
Of course. So you're obviously based in London at the moment. This is your home?
It is. This is one of my offices.
Okay. And what have you been caught up doing? Because I've been seeing you doing so much. You were recently in Africa with Jimmy. You're obviously constantly working on new technologies through nChain. What's been happening in your world?
Well, first of all, there's all the normal work stuff. So we create technology that we patent so that we can lock it into Bitcoin Cash. That covers a wide variety of areas. I'm up to paper number basically 725, I think. So. But we don't let people know what our patents are until the last moment.
Sounds like a good idea. 725 patents. You must have been working on this for quite some time.
The patents take a while to actually come through, so yes. But all of these things will come over. They're starting to come out, so bit by bit.
Absolutely. You're looking well. I know you've been keeping yourself busy. You do the martial arts. You've been working in the gym in your gym studio over there. Do you want to, if you could just start off by giving us a day in the life of Satoshi, day in the life of Craig Wright, sorry. That would be day in the life of Craig Wright. Greatly appreciated.
Okay, so most weekdays I get up at a little bit before 6 o'clock. I start in the gym. I have a trainer a few days a week. The other ones I go down by myself. From there, I shower, get ready, all the normal things. I then practice language classes. I'm doing Chinese at the moment, so I have a bit of practice on that in the morning, and then I start writing meetings and everything else. That goes through most of the day, depending on whether I'm going in the office or not, which will vary. I try not to. I try to avoid going in and annoying all the staff. They're much happier when I'm not there, so I try and keep them happy by not being there.
That sounds very fascinating. So you're studying Chinese. I noticed that you have a fascination with the Orient. I think I heard you mention that you studied martial arts, Mantis style or something like that. I used to do the same as a kid. Is there any specific reason that you've taken this interest in the Chinese language, the Chinese culture?
Well, there's a lot of growth in China. Now, even though it's going to be a long, long time before China is equal in the average income to the US, they've got a lot of people. So even when they get up to half the average income of the USA, you're going to have a scenario where they have many times the population, which will actually put them as a bigger economy. So going forward, they're going to be an interesting force to be reckoned with. Now, if you're looking at somewhere like India, where I've been extensively before, then speaking in English is fine because every single region has its own dialect, and even Indians don't like speaking to other Indians in their own dialect, so they end up speaking English. Africa is a combination of French, German, and English for the most part. French is something I'm slowly improving at. My spoken French is terrible. I have a terrible Australian accent that makes me sound horrible, even though it's French. But my written French isn't bad. I'm actually doing one of my doctorates at the moment at CNAM, which is in Paris. So.
The ever-learning Craig Wright. Craig, so I wanted to get into the origins of Bitcoin, speak more about the economics. I listened to the interview I think you last did on, I think it was on the What Bitcoin Did channel, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. It was very, very heated, but I think what was really fascinating about that conversation is you mapped out the definition of Bitcoin. I think one of the conversations that's been going on the interwebs at the moment is in regards to what Bitcoin is. It seems that the Bitcoin core group are talking about how Bitcoin is defined through consensus, and then, of course, you mapped out how the protocol was set in stone, and we can't have Bitcoin being anything. So I found that very interesting. If you could speak a little about what Bitcoin is, and also if you can go into the origins of Bitcoin. One of the fascinating things I've learned only from you is you're the first person I found that was actually making a separation between Bitcoin, the blockchain, and the economics. Like, you spoke specifically about how the blockchain has been around for quite some time, since the early 2000s, I think, and it's actually the economic component of Bitcoin that makes it what it is. So if you could just speak a bit about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you could just speak a bit about the origins of Bitcoin, and if you could define it, that would be a great way to lay the foundation, I think.
So we really go back to Lamport signature systems. These are back in the late 70s, actually. And a Lamport signature system is effectively a hashed chain of signatures. Now, that's really what Bitcoin is. The difference and distinction when adding all these other parts like proof of work, which, I mean, most of the origins of proof of work were actually RPOW from Hal Finney's code that was used in Bitcoin. He put that out after he fixed it for Dr. Back there. We then come up with really a problem that many people had. How do you actually make this work? How do you actually enforce it? So the Byzantine general problem is not quite what people think. Each general isn't unique and isn't equal. And that's part of the problem that people seem to forget. Each general can lie about his army. So it's not just a matter of each general voting and ensuring that you have one-for-one voting. The actual vote is proof of what you can achieve and what you can do. We don't want to align 5 generals who each have 1% of the army. We want to ensure that we have the majority of the army to succeed. So if we can get 2 generals out of 7, but those 2 generals have the majority of, say, 60%, and the others have only a small amount, 40%, then just those 2 ensure the security of the chain. The army has enough people to do what it needs to do, etc., in that problem. So what we're really seeing in Bitcoin that people miss is it's not proof of work as getting a block. You don't want to get a block. The actual proof of work is issuing the block. It's the generals showing all the other generals that they can do something in a provable, secure manner. So issuing a block is actually ensuring that all other people who build on that block can then use your block and vote on it. So the miner's task is to ensure that they not only find a block, but get it to other miners. That's where people go wrong. Now, that incentivizes the network to become densely connected and eventually get something close to a near complete graph. That's not every person voting all the time. For one simple reason: protocol should be fixed. If you don't fix protocol, you don't have money. So one thing people are forgetting is smart contracts will have to live a long time. law is law. Code is just something that you have a written form of whatever. It doesn't matter that zeros and ones. Zeros and ones are a new technology that replaces paper. That's it. No more. So we have to have something that will be robust long enough to actually act as a token system, act as whatever else. Now, if you're looking at real property, then that's going to be potentially a long period of time for 25 years after the final transaction. If you think about a home loan, and you have maybe, some people even have 40-year home loans now, which seems a bit ridiculous, but if you have a 40-year home loan, that means you have to have something that remains valid for 65 years. Let's extend that even further. One of the uses of the blockchain would be an attestation service for things like digital rights. Imagine a world where we don't have to have government-controlled copyright. We can have private law and all sorts of things like this. But even then, maybe we have some system that is analogous to what we have now, and we have 50, 75, whatever years, not necessarily past the author's death as we have now, but some system like this. And even then, we have a requirement for 50 to 75 years or more attestation. So in that, you cannot have a protocol that changes regularly. Imagine now that someone votes a change every 6 weeks, every year. It doesn't really matter. The base protocol changes, and things that you started using are no longer valid. You end up with the scenario that you collapse money, because money is trust. It is basically a means of liquefying and transmitting trust.
Okay, that's a lot of stuff to take in. It's very fascinating. One of the things I really wanted to get into with you is the purpose of Bitcoin. I mean, I find that over the last few years, the purpose has changed. When I say purpose, I think initially it was the libertarians that were getting on the Bitcoin bandwagon, wanting to use this as a way of separating economics from state. And whereas I feel like that is still the goal for a lot of people, I mean, this is a primarily libertarian podcast. Over the last few years, particularly with the advent of SegWit coin, as you call it, it seems as if people are taking on... Sorry?
When I'm being nice, yes.
Yes. But it seems as if the focus now is more on using Bitcoin as just another form of exchange, and there doesn't seem to be this emphasis on people having of sound hard money. Like, it seems as if people are more focused on getting the government involved in regulations and things like that. Now, when it comes to the design of Bitcoin, would you say that it had a particular philosophy at hand? Was it libertarian? I mean, people talk about how Bitcoin is actually socialist, at least some people. I think some of us know better. But
Bitcoin is as far from socialist as you could ever really get. I mean, it is about the opposite in a binary sense of socialism. And anarcho-capitalist, it's not that either, because I don't care what you say. You need rules, and people agree to things, and no matter what, even if everyone is voluntary and votes, then your voluntary vote is you can leave. So it's really what I would call, it aligns to what some other people like to call objectivist. So it is a capitalist corporate system. And like it or not, corporations are voluntary. You don't need to work for a corporation. You don't need to be part of one. So unfortunately, at the creation of what we see as money now around 1914, 1915, we altered what money is, and we created something that went from a hard currency, and back when we were on a proper gold sort of not even gold exchange standard, but the world was once on fairly much a solid gold standard, which a lot of people didn't like, because it meant people actually had to pay their debts, and poor farmers had to sort of negotiate things based on the land, because technology was destroying farming. mechanization was destroying farming, but instead of blaming the reality of it, which is change happens, people love to blame the monetary system or things that they can understand. So to go back to that, what we saw is the issuing of promissory notes on a large scale around 1915. This was because the British, the German, the French, and Russian governments all failed to understand the depth of what, well, really was a new form of war. The cost of war increased markedly. I mean, if you look at anything that happens in World War One, it was a defensive war that people thought would be cheap because it's defensive, but it was remarkably expensive. Now, that led to need over all those years to find a way of paying. And governments started issuing bonds and promissory notes and other such things. And that's led to the current credit system that we have now. I mean, people love to blame sort of the reparations placed on Germany rather than actually German policy for everything that happened. But the reality there was the maximum income tax would have actually been about 35% in Germany if the government had decided to actually impose those costs on the people rather than printing money. And from any modern economy, where we've seen the maximum income in France hit over 70% at one stage, 35% of the maximum income tax isn't that bad. I would prefer it to be no income tax at all, but so I'm not arguing here that income tax is good. I'm just saying they could have addressed it in different ways.
Sure.
Now, this goes back to what I was actually saying, though. Now, what we have in Bitcoin is a true hard commodity money again. What we have in other systems, and where people want to take it, things like Lightning, is the recreation of promissory notes, which is very interesting in that people are skirting around the issue that you're creating a regulated security. Bitcoin itself is a regulated security. Under USC 15, blah, 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 Securities Act, you actually find that Bitcoin is a unregulated security only because there are certain exemptions, and they're very narrow, and these are incredibly narrow, that allow Bitcoin to exist because it is a commodity-based note. So as a currency note based on commodity, it forms private money. And a private money of that type as cash is actually excluded from the purviews of the FCA over here or the US SEC. Interestingly enough, once you change that and you create an overlay financial network, you have a set of promissory notes that are exchanged, such as Lightning, then you're well within the promissory note restrictions of the SEC. Now, people don't like to talk about this on that side of things, but that actually requires that AML's counterterrorism funding laws will be required, because the bit they're ignoring is each of those Lightning nodes receives a transaction fee. Now, Bitcoin miners do receive fees, but the distinction here is a very narrow exemption category that just happened to follow exactly along how Bitcoin was designed. So, and I mean very narrow. It is incredibly narrow. It's like a tightrope walker on a piece of spider's silk.
Just speaking about the design a little there, if you could just go into this, if I may.
Yes.
One of the things I read of yours was in reference to the Protestant work ethic within the design of Bitcoin. And I found this very interesting. I mean, you've spoken about how Bitcoin, BCH, be only Bitcoin, is very objectivist, capitalist in its design.
Yes.
And I would like to ask you, as far as the design, like, did it have the purpose of, how do I put this? One of the things that I've noticed in Bitcoin is it seems to have almost this religious theme. And I guess I say this because the way that Bitcoin is forked out, I mean, as far as people being able to fork and start their own coin, you have a look at some of the things that have taken place over the last few years, and I see a lot of connections between how religions have kind of forked off. And I guess this is a little tangential, but was any of this, in regards to the fork, in regards to the design, in regards to the Protestant work ethic, what did you mean by that when you made reference to this in your writings? Was there any kind of I guess not so much a religious tone, but any purpose behind the decision to, I guess, make it the way it is, to follow this Protestant work ethic?
If you look at the growth of England, a nation of shopkeepers, between the 17th and 18th century, the greatest development happened because of people working. The same with the Calvinist growth, the same with all these other people throughout history who have basically learned that everything is about consumption, but it's the form of consumption. So all expenditure is always about consumption. But what are you buying and why? Are you buying now or are you buying later? And how are you achieving that? Are you saving? Are you working hard? What are you actually doing? So looking at this in its truest sense, what we end up with is a system where we start to understand that the development of any successful system throughout history has come when people have been willing not just to save, but to invest. And this is, of course, the difference between HOODL and all the rest. Investment isn't just a gold bar under the bed. Investment is finding something that does more. If you want government bonds, they basically keep you at the same level. Those government bonds mean with interest and inflation, you stay about even. And anyone who's ever looked at anyone financially throughout history will understand that if you don't take risk and you don't work, then staying even means that over time as you expend on what you're doing, you actually lose money. The amount of what you have in the future diminishes. So to create a system that works, you need something where people are willing to invest in capital so that they can spend later. That's a combination of everything. Now, this selfishness is not what people try and mark it out to be. We are selfish because we do things for self. We develop things for self. We all want our family to be better. I want to be able to put my kids through university and not have them have a debt. I want to be able to go on holidays and have them come over. And all of these things matter. These are the things that actually make life worthwhile. Now, we can sit there and argue that that makes you selfish. There's people in need, but there are always people in need. There are always people who are going to be hungry. Many of those are political situations, but the reality of the scenario is no matter how much you do, if you're just giving charity, you never teach someone to basically go out and proverbially fish and find their own food. You teach people to sit there waiting for handouts. You teach them to beg. So what we need to do is educate people, which is capital. Education is a form of capital. It is one that can't be taken. We need to look at the form of capital as well. Just building a road to the middle of nowhere, well, that's capital too. But why? And that comes down to education at the same time. I mean, one of the other people you interviewed here, Derek, doesn't like unis, I do. But I will say that it comes down to how you use a university. If you go out there and you expect to be taught rather than teaching yourself, the university fails. If you do the wrong degree, university fails. If you learn mathematics and use the help that you have and learn, like universities are really meant to be, how to study yourself, but access resources. That's what matters. Not the lecturer teaching you, but yourself learning. So that's where people go wrong today. They expect to go to uni and get a good job by getting a BA in Morris dancing or something like this. And I'd love to pick on that one because when I was in my teens, I had a girlfriend, well, actually about 19, I had a girlfriend who was doing a MA in Morris dancing. Literally,
Morris dance, that's a type of dancing?
Yeah, it's over here in Britain, they dance around the maypole, and you get a whole lot of big guys, dressed up in ribbons and things like that, waving bells, and I get myself into trouble by saying effeminate blacksmiths waving hankies at each other. But yes, I mean, that you can argue that is a valid degree and it teaches you research, and really it doesn't help you do anything.
Yeah, and I've always found with the arts particularly, they're things that you should really teach yourself when it comes to getting a music degree or a dancing degree. I mean, granted, it can help going to university, but I find that through practice, through effort, that's the best way to become better at what you do. And you mentioned that whereas universities have a place, it's better to, at least this is the message I got from what you're saying, that it's better to teach yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, unless you're making a conscious effort to learn yourself, it's really not going to have the same kind of value. Now, you're someone that's obviously amassed a tremendous amount of knowledge through your years, and whereas you've done all of these university degrees, you have all these masters, would you say that you were self-taught for the most part? I mean, granted, you were going to these universities. Are you someone that looks at yourself as an autodidact? I
look at myself, I mean, university degrees should be self-taught. What they do is give you a framework. So they give you a path forward in knowledge. So knowledge is different than information. And this is where people go wrong. They think information is free, therefore everything should be free. The reality is data, usable data, information, and knowledge are all different things. Data abounds, but data doesn't help you at all. You can easily get drowned in data. There are exabytes worth of data being created every day now across the world, and that's only increasing exponentially. What is the value of that information that you're now obtaining? Is it actually raw data? Is it something that you have addressed? And that takes human time, human effort, and whatever else. So, like it or not, these things don't come for free. So creating something, taking it from an idea and turning it into something else is also human effort. Anyone can have an idea. If we take Mark Twain had lots of ideas about the future. He talked about a number of advanced things that could be built. He had a world of the future in one of his novels. Back in the 20s, people talked about, what if we could create a space elevator by putting a cable up into space and having it far enough into space that we could then actually have the rotation of the Earth balance that, and then have, just like elevators, something on either side. But how do you actually make that cable? So the idea is nothing until you have an implementation. And this is where people go wrong. So going back to the first point, universities give you a framework. You also need to learn that that doesn't mean that you should be meek and mild and do what everyone says. My last courses, before I started my doctorates at the moment, I was doing a Master of Science in Econometrics at University of London. And I had a number of papers that I actually wrote where I did about the opposite of what the life work of some of my lecturers were saying. I basically sat there and I said, you guys are wrong because. I had a few very Keynesian lecturers, and I sat there and pulled apart and said, your work's wrong because X, Y, and Z, and I still got a high distinction. Why? Because I actually took the time to sit there and write down all the points and argue this and researched it correctly And I did get a comment saying I could get better marks and get a high distinction if I had been less one-sided. But once you've got a high distinction, who really cares whether you get a higher or lower high distinction? But anyway, that's my personal thing. But the whole point is you don't need to just follow what people feed you. You don't need to be a sheep. You can actually take different ideas.
Absolutely. I've always thought that the best progress always comes from when people take it upon themselves to move outside of what everyone else is doing, kind of think outside of the box. I really want to focus on some of the economics of Bitcoin. Now, I listened to, I think everyone's heard this debate that took place between Samson Mao and Roger Ver a few months back, and Samson made the point in regards to crypto Keynesians versus crypto Austrians, and I found this point really interesting. And he made if memory serves me, he made the point that there are certain people within the community, I think he was making reference to Bitcoin Cash proponents, that are more focused on transactions, on transaction throughput. I think that was the term he used. And then, of course, you have the Bitcoin core proponents that are more focused on using sound money. So this whole hoodling, as you put it. And at least I think that's what he meant. But the bottom line is that he mentioned that, granted, Bitcoin Cash is focusing on, obviously, transaction adoption, all that kind of stuff. He was making the argument that his approach, at least the approach of core, of focusing on having secure, sound money, focusing on the safety, is just as valid. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's anything to this whole crypto Keynesian message? And do you see Bitcoin Cash as being crypto Keynesian?
Basically, what you're going to end up with is if you try and create Bitcoin as digital gold, you're going to have digital nothing. Bitcoin will not work as digital gold. Now, in particular, we have a halving in 2 years and a second halving in 4. Now, there's a huge problem before we get into any of the other issues just on this point. If Bitcoin doesn't scale, and I'll talk Bitcoin generally, Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Candy and whatever else, I don't really care, and we're talking markedly, then it's not going to survive. The idea that on 3 Bitcoin, you're going to have miners actually validly doing this, as Moore's law makes ASICs faster and faster, which it will be 100 plus times as much hash power at that stage, chasing the same rewards. If you get to the point where you don't increase this enough, it fails, because the security of the network requires investment. If you don't have that constant investment, you have the ability for an uninterested party to come along and actually collapse the network. The only way this works is for the fees to actually increase. And the only way that the fees increase is through volume. You'll notice luxury goods don't end up being highly profitable. Each individual item may be profitable, but Mercedes are owned by Chrysler. We have Lamborghini, that's owned. We have, Daimler, owned. Maybach, owned. We have Rolls-Royce, owned, etc. What you end up with is volume ends making more capital. If you want to make a lot of money and you want to have something valuable, you need volume. It may seem counterintuitive to many people, but you make way more money on 0.1 cent fees than you make on $1 fees, because the amount of use cases are exponentially greater. It's a long tail effect. If you cut things off at the long tail, you get a very small number of fees with things like Bitcoin. But even then, why? At the moment, I send between my banks internationally, because of the banking arrangements I have, 9 cents. So all these things about how cheap it is to send internationally, I've sent hundreds of thousands of dollars with 2-hour clearances for 9 cents. That's modern banking. Now, not everyone's set up to do that. So because they don't make many transactions, they get charged more. But big corporations and other such things don't.
That's an interesting point. Obviously, someone like yourself, I think for a lot of people within the Western world, they do have access to banks. It doesn't seem as necessary having something like Bitcoin. I mean, what do you say to people that don't have this libertarian mindset, don't really care about the separation of economics and state? Now, for something like Bitcoin, do you see it? How would you sell it to someone that, I guess, in the first world that is able to do essentially what we're doing now through banks? I mean, what are the advantages of using Bitcoin in the first world outside of having your own sound money that no one else controls? Can you think of anything that you might like to bring to the fore? Because whereas I can see this having a lot of benefit in third world nations.
Now or later?
Yeah. Sorry?
There's 2 questions. Now or later?
Now or late? Well, now. I mean...
Now, not many. If you're first world, then no. I'll be honest, no. Third world, a hell of a lot. Where we're going to take this is a different matter. First world, in coming years, we have threshold technologies, we have atomic swaps, we have a whole lot of other things we've been working on behind the scenes. That will radically change the nature of finance, banking, and everything else. We can accelerate the number of transactions on an exchange, not just mildly, but markedly. Right now, you have multi-day settlements, and on weekends even longer. Now, an exchange with a 10-minute settlement average can actually start spending way quicker, and that will start happening. When we take this, though, to places like Africa, this becomes remarkably different. Not because we have lightning or large fees or anything silly like this, or satellites or anything crazy, but because we have cash that can be used with sub 1 cent. Cash that can allow tokenization of fiat for onboarding. Cash that can be used for instant atomic swaps and not hash-locked contracts. Hash-locked contracts are not atomic. Atomic, by definition, means instant. It means it happens or it doesn't happen. Full stop. If you have to wait an hour, a week, a month, whatever else, and put it in effective time escrow, it's not atomic. If we take this to remittance, people along the South Africa to Zimbabwe corridor, they bleed money right now. Every exchange they do is painful for them. If we take people along Central America and South America, being able to trade between different locations is painful. Take people in Manila, maids in Singapore, things like this. These people have true needs. The ability to actually set and control their financial security, their sovereignty, that matters to these people, not because they're libertarians, because they need to live.
For sure. Sure. It's interesting. I remember listening to one of your talks. I think it was a talk or an interview, and you mentioned you spent some time in Ghana. I'm actually from Ghana, West Africa myself, and I can definitely attest to one of the things you're talking about, how people over time they build houses and it's their savings. I mean, my parents for I think the last 20 years had been slowly building this house, and it's kind of like a store of their wealth, and it's something that I can definitely attest to. And that, I think, obviously with the advent of Bitcoin, it makes it a lot more efficient, makes it easier for people to store their wealth, gaining access to Bitcoin, rather than having to have it done solely over the course of your lifetime through building this house. So I can definitely see applications in the third world. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Wright, is in regards to the future of Bitcoin. One of the things that I heard, I'm sure you're familiar with the works of Andreas Antonopoulos. Now, one of his views in regards to what Bitcoin is going to look like in the future is he looked at it in the same way that he looks at languages. In that, granted, there are obviously many, many different languages. There are key languages that are used. And I know you're a Bitcoin maximalist, as am I. And I think ultimately we do want one coin in order to have the best system, make things more efficient, easier. But do you see a world where there are going to be a lot of different cryptocurrencies, but just, I guess, a few? Or do you see there being only one coin?
It will only work as one.
Why is that?
Full stop.
Why is that? I mean, you could have your
system. The economics of the system don't allow multiple competing systems to survive. If you end up with multiple competing monies, they all fall back to one. If you look at what happens in areas where there is an ease to accessing US dollar. So Jimmy and I were recently over in Rwanda, and I found people would take US dollars, if you handed them US dollars, without a qualm. Rwandan dollars, some people accept them, some people say no, and this is in Rwanda. So if you get to the scenario where you have differential aspects of currency, then you have a transactional cost of moving between those. And with technology we're bringing out for atomic swaps and other such things, the cost is going to be practically zero. So if you can atomically swap between currencies globally without any friction, then you have the scenario, then why would you hold in your own depreciating currency?
Craig, just to start, do you want to, can you expand on the concept of atomic swaps for people that are a little new to this? Because I know that is a relatively new technology, the oblivious transfers, the atomic swaps. Can you explain what exactly that is?
A real atomic swap, not a hash lock contract, is the creation of an exchange where you and I exchange A for B at whatever value or exchange notational value that we accept.
So let's say Ethereum for Ripple or something like that. That can be done with atomic swaps.
US dollar coin for Bitcoin.
Without an exchange.
So instantly just happening. Now, that can actually be done to the point where you can have a pre-settlement amount on an exchange that is securely locked into yourself. Because of thresholding and group signature technology, you can effectively control your own money, but the exchange also controls enough that they can't lose. And we can have it so that you can do a key exchange that ensures that it's going to be instant. Now, some of that comes down to a few things that go way beyond Bitcoin that I've been doing. We've got some patents now that have been filed on group additions in ECDSA. What that would allow would be everything Schnorr does, except more efficiently. So we can actually do a group signature where it's a single Bitcoin address, but potentially there could be 10, 100, whatever else, signing parties as part of that address. And you won't even know.
That's some powerful stuff. It seems as if there's all these amazing technologies coming out of nChain. I mean, you mentioned you're up to 725, I think. Is there anything that is yet to come out that you think is really going to surprise people? I mean, the atomic... I think I heard you in the last interview.
I think there's a lot going to surprise people.
There's a lot... Okay, well, I'm definitely...
I won't talk about it all yet. We have already seen some of our technology, our number 42 sort of key exchange has been used in the creation of Keyport, if I'm getting the name right. That's effectively a group chat application where people can exchange sort of values and securely encrypt everything between each other. We've got a number of ways of doing that, and I've even managed to find a way of doing Diffie-Hellman key exchanges in ECDSA, which is in theory, and if you look at any of the crypto lists and whatever else, only able to be scaled to 2 parties. We can do it to n parties where n can be any value.
Fantastic.
It's something that hasn't been released yet, no one's heard about, but we've actually done it, and it's in for patenting, which of course goes beyond Bitcoin as well, because in theory you can't do this. So let's go for Schnorr and Lamport and all these ugly signature schemes that allow that, because no one's figured out how to do it in ECDSA, but unfortunately for those people, we have.
Fantastic. So the purpose of all of these new technologies, is it to boost adoption? I mean, they're all fantastic inventions, but what's the overall goal of adding all of these different patents, these technologies? Because I have heard Roger Ver...
Two different questions. There's two different questions there.
One of the arguments I think Roger Ver made in regards to atomic swaps is he thinks it's all fascinating stuff, but he does believe that the focus should be on adoption. And I guess that is the purpose of these technologies. Would that be right? To make Bitcoin Cash more attractive, the coin that does everything? Or is there some other...
Should always be the coin that does everything. There only should be one. I've said that many times. Good money will always outplay bad money if the environment allows it, and that's what we're creating. And we will patent all this. I didn't originally set up patenting half the things I did, apart from 2 reasons. One, I had a big fight with the government who said I wasn't really doing research because I wasn't patenting. And 2, I don't want to see fragmentation of scam coins. And most of these are. I mean, I'll say, quite frankly, apart from a few isolated use cases, most of them are pure scams. They're, let's copy Bitcoin and make some silly little change because we want to pump and dump and make money quickly. They want to get in and out within 18 months and then sit on a yacht, which is fine. If you're going to spend a little bit of time a year sitting on a yacht, and I will be, then that's great. But the majority of time should be working. So yes, it's nice to make money. I enjoy making money. I'm much happier where I am now, having made money, than ever having to struggle every day. But that's a separate scenario. What we need to do is focus on one thing. If there's only Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can do everything that Ethereum can do, and later this year people will find out that is the case, not just it can do everything Ethereum can do, but Ethereum can't do everything Bitcoin Cash can do.
Is that so? At the current stage of Bitcoin Cash right now, Bitcoin Cash can do everything that Ethereum can do, and more.
Yes.
Do you see any benefits to Ethereum? I mean, I heard you mention a while back where you comparing the proof of stake system in Ethereum to the Bitcoin Cash approach, and I think you kind of took a stab at your friend Vitalik Buterin, and I think you mentioned that one of the reasons Vitalik supports the proof of stake model is that he's Russian and he likes oligopolies.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
If you consider very quickly 2 people, both with equal families, one who earns a base $40,000 US a year, and another who earns $400,000 US a year. Compare the savings that each family can do. If you're lucky, and I mean very lucky, you might be able to, after tax and expenses, save $2,000 US a year, which is really not a lot, as the $40,000 family. If you actually consider that in reality, and you have holidays or anything like that and enjoy yourself, forget it. You're not even getting that $2,000. But let's, for argument's sake, say $2,000. If you're earning $400,000 after tax, you're going to be basically able to easily put aside $20,000 if you want to invest that in stocks, shares, and other things. In fact, without blinking an eye and still going on holidays, you can put aside $50,000 or $60,000. So
Wealth leads to more wealth, sure.
The effect of money is not linear. As you go up, you find that you have a superlinear effect at first, and then it even becomes a quadratic function. The more money you have, the more that you don't need to use. So the richest people don't ever need to touch what they have. There are people way richer than me, and I can't expect to spend, if I spend every day of my life being stupid, I won't be able to spend all my money before I die.
I'm sure you could if you had 12 wives.
I'm sure if I had 24 wives, I still couldn't. It would be ridiculous and all the rest, but once you get to a certain stage, and it's not as big as people think, you start getting to a point where unless you do stupid things, then you can live quite happily for your entire life. So oligopolies allow control. And that's what it's really about. If you have the majority of money, then you don't need to live on it. So imagine in that proof of stake model, everyone says it's nice and fair. But the reality is the people who vote, the people who can lock up their money, are those who don't care. And they still want returns. So they're going to lock up their money to vote more money. They're going to basically do that, which gets us back to our current fiat system, where we have a few that get rich at the expense of the majority. That's proof of stake. It's not democratic, it's an oligarchy. And every oligarchy throughout history has been sold as a democratic, we're here for the people. Every one. Lenin sold himself for the people. Hitler sold himself for the people. Mussolini, the people. Yay, the people.
Absolutely protect the people. I see so many philosophical themes that come out when we address Bitcoin. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is there's this ideological war that's going on between the socialists versus the libertarians, and it seems as if you have one side wanting to put restrictions on people because they believe that it's going to lead to a lot of problems. For instance, the whole small block size versus large block size. You have the socialists saying, we need to make sure that the government doesn't come and disband this Bitcoin. If people need too many powerful computers, these miners, it's going to lead to this these organizations forming together, and it's going to lead to problems but the bottom line is...
It will lead to those people forming together. Those people aren't the miners or the people who actually care about making profit, though. Mm-hmm. Those people are the new politicians who don't actually invest, who don't have skin in the game, who want to call for other people, who want to rally people without doing. Business people don't do this because they don't have time to do this. If you want to be a successful business person, then you have to work hard. So some business people will start rallying together as they start losing profit when they get big. We see that in modern society. We see that in the banks. We see it in airports, in airlines, in freight companies, etc. They rally together to get people to stand behind them saying, we need to protect your job. We're here for you, because they want government protection, because they don't want competition. Competition may make you better off, but people don't always like better off. It's the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times.
I like that.
That's what we don't want.
May you live in interesting times.
Mm.
Craig, I just wanted to ask just a couple of technical questions, because we're coming to the hour now, and I had a few questions from some of your followers that I wanted you to address. Now, you were probably the first person that I heard speak about Bitcoin being Turing complete. Now, when I think of Turing completeness, I have this idea of artificial intelligence and Skynet, and I was hoping if you could just break this thing down layman style for what what is Turing completeness, and how is Bitcoin this Skynet-like thing? No, how is Bitcoin Turing complete?
Many people don't understand what Turing completeness is. Now, Bitcoin is a total Turing machine. That doesn't mean that it needs to run infinitely, because there is no statement about infinite. It is unbounded. Now, unbounded and infinite are infinitely different, to play on that, because the largest number you can think of is infinitely smaller than infinity. So you can think of the biggest possible system and the longest possible time that you can have a machine run. That means it's unbounded. The tape doesn't have a limit. In Bitcoin, the script is without the 200 opcode limit, and without the transaction limit, and without considering block size, and considering like every Turing machine that you have to consider objectively runs on real machines on this earth, so we can't expect to do a computation that will take up more silicon than exists in this galaxy. Within that, there are restrictions, of course, but that doesn't mean that it's not able to be unbounded. It may be unwieldy, it may not be efficient, but they're separate issues. Now, so number one, we have a predicate logic system that is actually greater than a predicate logic system, because we have 0 or 1, but the script actually ends as 0 or other. And that can be extended in op return, which the original op return non-standard format was multiple op returns, each being 4 gig maximum. Not that the code at the time could handle that without crashing, but that was effectively what the protocol was set to. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a good idea yet, but the reality is you can create a lot in very small code bases, even unrolling and all the rest. The ability to create simple machines can be done. Now, where people go wrong is they come up against this thing called the halting problem. The halting problem means that you cannot tell whether a Turing complete script will load or fail or end or not. And they say because you always know that something happens in Bitcoin, that it's not Turing complete. If you read CIPSA, which is one of the main textbooks, you'll find a little section on that's not really expanded on called a decider. Bitcoin is a total Turing machine or a decider. Now, a decider is something where you split the functionality of testing the script and running it. In compilation, in creating something and testing so that we can write the script, we know whether it will halt or not if we create the script. What we don't know is in unrolling and creating a function, whether or not we will ever end. So that's the discrepancy. When we're creating the function and unrolling it, using all those little terms that are in my Godel, Beyond Godel paper, so identity functions, the characteristic function, all of which can be done within Bitcoin as a 2PDA, we end up with a problem in the creation of a compiler that sits on top. Will that end? Will it create a script that will ever end? We don't know that. That's our halting problem. So the cheat in Bitcoin is moving the halting problem off to the side. And then when you've actually created the program, you know the cost of the program, you know how long it is, you know the length, you know everything else. So the gas problem in Ethereum never hits us because you determine the length of the program off-chain and then can run it.
I wonder what Vitalik would think about that. Be curious to hear you have that discussion with him.
If they could get past the technobabble in my paper, as they put it, which has been verified by others. There's a professor over in Greece who's written a paper on what I've done and basically demonstrated that it's Turing complete. And Clemens Lay has also some papers now demonstrating that it is Turing complete. And that function, it's Turing complete, also along some of the patents we've now done, seeing as everyone said I was bullshitting and can't be done, I've patented this. You can actually have the state go from transaction to transaction. And I know people love to say that you can't control state between transactions, but unfortunately you actually can. And when our patents come out, you'll get to see how. There are things called knowledge proofs that can be built within simple scripts. XOR, mod, and a few other things allow you to make the equivalent of a YALS garbled circuit within Bitcoin script. It enables the creation of in-script oracles and other such things, and that allows you to actually have a script that can only feed into another determined script. Now, what that then effectively means is your Turing tape is no longer even the script. Each transaction in each block is one tape point. And effectively, you have an unbounded system now. Because as long as Bitcoin runs, which hopefully will be a long, long time, as long as it runs, you actually have computation going on.
Okay. Greg, that's a lot of stuff to take in.
I'll give you a final secret before we go too.
Okay.
Predicate logic systems end 0 or 1. Now, if it ends as 0, it means it doesn't get on the blockchain. Now, if you think of something like CUDA or programming on Xeon Phi, we can parallelize code. Now, rather than looping in the normal way, we can actually create a divided split transaction where we send and every possible input is created into a possible small output transaction. Now, only those transactions that are valid will be written to the blockchain. Now, this is a way of parallelizing, but also looking at how CUDA works. So if we imagine our transaction set to be like CUDA, and we send it to 3,800 and whatever processes simultaneously, we only get the result from one of those GPUs, even though it's running across all of them. Now, the one that ends correctly first is the thread that wins. The transaction that gets written to the blockchain is the thread that wins. So if you think differently about how the system works, you start to understand just how powerful it can be.
Powerful indeed. Craig, I want to get to some questions that some of your Twitter followers had for you. Mm-hmm. And some of them are a little lighthearted, but okay. First of all, okay, this is a bit more serious. This is from that BCH guy. What are your thoughts on the Circle Bitmain partnership and the potential USD coin?
A USD coin can be done within Bitcoin Cash. That's the way I would like to see it. And if you have a tokenized coin, that's not a problem. You're not going to do it as a Lightning coin. That actually, and I'm starting to write up some of the reasons why, will become extremely problematic very quickly. It's not going to be done as a USD coin. I mean, it can be, but you don't end up with a blockchain. You end up with a proof of stake system. So if you have a USD coin, then you're going to have to basically imagine no difference from our current monetary system. Our USD coin is just Fed-issued monetary coin, which can be altered, reversed, deleted, etc., based on whatever the hell the banks feel like. Now, that isn't what I would consider a blockchain.
No, and I think that's something many of us fear. I think having a situation where this entire idea of Bitcoin turns on us and everything can be monitored by the government, everything can be traced, everything can be taxed.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely don't want a USD coin. Okay, Craig, more of a lighthearted question here. This is from the Beach Boys. I love this question because my podcast tends to go into a lot of the more outside of the mainstream conspiracy theories and whatnot. But okay, so have aliens visited planet Earth? What are your thoughts on that? This is from the Beach Boys.
If we limit aliens to the possibility that something like a microbial life form is an alien, and possibly something like that has developed and also seeded the Earth, then I would say I don't know, but it's possible. If we're talking about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, young teenage guys coming down and gang probing cattle, no.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so okay, now this is more of a nuanced question here. This is from @halffreeze. Can you explain in depth about the essence of trade to create wealth? How Spain's hoarding of gold doesn't make them rich, and India under Nehru becomes poor. And he also wants you to talk about world history a bit more. So a lot of things to discuss there.
That's a lot. Under Nehru, he followed the process that Gandhi wanted, which was everyone could be self-sufficient. Rather than having trade, we start thinking about how we isolate ourselves into a small self-sufficient village. Now, imagine doing that as a logical exercise. Imagine, rather than trading here in London, we only have what we can grow in London, the clothes we can wear in London, the food that we can have in London. And we start seeing that it actually becomes more and more expensive to produce. Adam Smith talked about in Wealth of Nations how it was possible, even back then, in greenhouses to grow grapes and produce wine. And he talked about that in Scotland. Now, it is possible to create wine in Scotland. And Adam Smith said it was possible to create good wine in Scotland. Except the cost of doing that will always exceed the cost of producing wine in Italy or France or someone like this. So what we end up with is taking something that is, well, lower cost, that we can buy more with our goods and money, and exchanging what we're doing for less. So if we start thinking about that, we're doing less now. Why do we want to create less, have less? Because some Vedrick sort of idea of universal harmony in producing everything ourselves? What matters more, having women tied to spinning machines from 4 a.m. in the morning to late at night, or having everyone free, having our children not have to work? One example of a job that has disappeared in the last 100 years that actually existed before World War I is a gleaner. The word to glean information, to see, means to pick up something small that unnoticed. And it goes back to the job of a gleaner, who would be women and children who would walk around after the harvest, literally picking up small pieces of grain. That was enough to keep them alive. They would find dirty pieces of grain after the harvest and pick them up from the straw, grain by grain. That was their life. We don't have gleaners anymore. When a harvester comes through, nobody cares about the lost grain. We waste it, we could say. We waste it because it's not worth taking note of that waste. And someone like Gandhi would say, this is so wasteful, we produce this and we let it go to rot. Yippee! We let it go to rot because we have so much abundance that everyone doesn't need to worry. When you have people worrying about, I need to lose weight because I have so much food, that's when we have a real wealth in our society, where people start issuing, oh, we need to cut down on what we're eating. And even in Africa now, when I was a child, Africa, China, etc., was always calls for help because of poverty. Now, people are saying the quality of food in Africa isn't good enough, so people are getting fat. There are political situations, of course, and that's a different scenario altogether. But we have a wealthier world. And this is because of trade. Because subjectively, I value something you have more than that thing I want. We only trade because we both come out ahead. It's not a zero-sum game.
Absolutely.
I produce better at one thing, I specialize, and I trade with you. And the other great thing, rather than having lots and lots of little communities that all think they're special, that then fight with each other, trade brings us together as a people. It allows us to understand that we're all human, whether we're black, white, some sort of funny thing from the middle of God knows where, who's got rickets and whatever else because we've not had a decent upbringing, whether we're overeducated, undereducated, whatever else, we're all human. And that matters.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty much what capitalism is all about, but it still gets this bad rap from many of the socialists. It's just forced altruism when it comes down to it. That's how I look at it.
The first black American basketballer was actually hired by a racist. The first black American footballer was hired, again, by a racist. And the first baseballer who was black was hired by an American racist. 3 separate ones. All of which happened because, well, I don't know, the guy said he didn't like black people, but they earn him money.
Money talks.
So, like it or not, these people had an opportunity to be a sports star, not because government said they had to have equal opportunity, but because they were able to work hard and create something for themselves and force themselves and make it for themselves. And that may have been hard, but that only makes it even more special. So that's these guys who say, I don't like whatever, and still hire these people, it's because they make money. Like it or not, that's what capitalism does. And then other people get introduced to other cultures, other races, other whatever else. And that's how you start actually accepting that we're all different and that we can all live together.
Brilliant point there, Craig. Craig, I know we're running just a little out of time. Just a couple more questions I really want to get into. These are actually a couple of mine. Considering it is my podcast, I get to ask some questions here. First of all, I want to talk about your name, Professor Faustus, because I find this very intriguing. This is obviously your Twitter handle. Now,
yes.
Do you want to tell us a bit about the rationale behind that? I mean, I've heard you mention that everything you do is done for a reason, so I'd imagine there is some kind of backstory to that.
I quite like the original Marlowe version of Faust, the play. And in it, knowledge was everything. So we all sell our souls for something. And like it or not, I'll be honest, I've sold my soul for knowledge. I work early to late. I have time, I had a bit of time off with my family over in Paris. And the reality is, I work from home most of the time, apart from when I go into the office and annoy people. But when I'm working from home, I see my wife hardly at all. I have a walk with her, have a coffee with her, a few little bits and pieces, and I get up in the morning and I work in my office, and I work until dinner, and then I come up and I work. I mean, people can say what they want, but we have a multinational company, and that takes time. I write 12 paper concepts that the team then tidy up and reference properly and do all the other bits every week on average. That takes time. I'm doing 2 doctorates simultaneously. That takes time. And all the travel. And I wanted knowledge, and it comes at a cost. So on a different story, Archimedes was given a choice by the gods. Achilles was given a choice by the gods.
I love these Greek fables.
Achilles was given the choice of an easy life, where he would basically fade away, but he would be happy. He would see his children every day. He would never suffer. He would never have to struggle or fight. Or he could have a life where he changes the world. It would be a life where he will die early, he will die in pain, he will suffer, he will not see his family. And I know which one I chose.
Well said, I like that.
Everything comes at a cost.
Yeah. Reminds me of the JFK quote. I paraphrase, but don't ask for an easy life, but ask for the strength to endure a hard one, something to that effect. But yes. Craig, finally, I just wanted to ask you, I guess a bit of a technical question. One of the common criticisms I hear from the BTC supporters in regards to Bitcoin Cash is that it's not as safe as BTC. Obviously, the hashing power is a huge component of that. But I remember hearing you mention in one of your lectures about how, because of the SegWit layer Lightning Network, that Bitcoin Cash is, when it comes to double spending occurring on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain, it's less likely to occur than on the SegWit coin. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but is there any validity to that? And if there is, what would be the rationale?
If Lightning takes off, and that's a big if, and we get past the requirements to be a AML central 3 or 4 bank hubs around the world system, then what we end up with is the requirement to have online systems. Otherwise, you end up closing channels. Next, you have to have a punishment-based system. You have to try and punish people and take them out before they take your money. Now, these radically change the system. The problem is we have people saying, in math we trust and whatever else. Bitcoin's not in math or crypto we trust. There is no cryptography in Bitcoin. There are digital signatures. They are clear text, digitally signed things. There is math for that, but that is not encryption. There's a big distinction. Encryption, well, ECC is encryption, and yes, they're related technologies, but the digital signature pair is not encrypted. What we have is an economic system that is bounded by certain cryptographic techniques and tools, certain aspects of computer science. That is a completely different concept. That's what they don't understand. And over time, they're going to start seeing, in the next few years, some problems. BTC, and I'll say it now, can't survive 10 years. Think about the halving. If you start thinking about what you need to get to make a global system running on Lightning or anything else, number of transactions and the cost of transactions starts to go up. Now, this doesn't actually matter for Lightning, because one of the little pointed out bits is cross-chain transactions, etc. Lightning doesn't need Bitcoin. Lightning can start acting across, and it would do it easy if it wasn't for a number of patents they're about to discover that they will starting to actually breach, but we'll get to that another day. Lightning sits as a token, as an overlay on anything. Even on their own material, they talk about atomic swaps between Bitcoin and Litecoin. Now, to do that, you start actually realizing that you don't have scarcity of money anymore. The underlying layer doesn't matter anymore. So if Bitcoin fails, Lightning keeps going. If Lightning was ever to be successfully seeded, if Lightning would be purchased and created as bank system and whatever else, it becomes a digital SWIFT. It effectively then sits over top of a system. And if you can instantly swap between Litecoin and Bitcoin and whatever else, start thinking what that really means. It means you don't actually need the underlying system. The switch from standard modern fiat occurred the same way. It was the same bait and switch. You don't need that gold. You don't want to carry it. You don't need a redeemable gold certificate. So we'll give you this piece of paper, and gold has been removed. And over time, we end up with a scenario where we think that we have Bitcoin-backed currency, and we don't. So what we have in a system like Lightning is the creation of a parasitic overlay token designed to suck the value out of Bitcoin, because it has to collapse Bitcoin on BTC Core, because in 2 years' time, the block goes down to a reward of 6.25. In 6 years' time, 3, and under 2 in 10. To be worthwhile, you need, by the time it gets to that level, if you're doing a limited block size and whatever else, you need effectively 100k transaction fees. I've done econometrics. I'll eventually post all the data and everything like that, but you end up with 100k plus transaction fees. Now that means you get huge Lightning hubs that consolidate. That means you don't have Bitcoin anymore. And the thing is, they seem to think that you can do this using Bitcoin and that Bitcoin will stay there. Except one little problem. Bitcoin at 100k transaction, why do you need Bitcoin? Why not use Bankcoin as your underlying layer? Why not use US coin as your underlying layer? And if you can instantly swap, and Lightning is the value system, where does Bitcoin go?
That's a good point. Craig, finally, I want to ask you, I think, what is the most important question in this entire podcast? Are you ready for it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Craig, out of all the different superheroes, I know I at least know that you're a fan of manga. What superhero do you see yourself as? What do you think is most fitting for you?
I will have to say I like the one that I get portrayed as, which is the Batman bit. I've got two Batman cars, and I like the whole dichotomy between Bruce Wayne and Batman, and his sort of ultra-rich personality, and who gets to be a drunk asshole and everything like that, as well as Batman. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's a good one. I think that's very fitting. You know, with the martial arts, with the rich billionaire thing. I either had it as Batman or I became a big fan of the Doctor Strange recently. I kind of feel as if there's this mystery in regards to you. But Craig, I'm going to leave it there. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. I really do appreciate you being generous with your time. I've been following your works for the last 6 months. I think I've gone through every one of your videos that I can find on YouTube, and I've recently gone through all of your articles. Not all of the white papers. They're a bit too technical for me, but I'm going to start going through that. But ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out Craig's work. It's absolutely fascinating. Craig, if there's anything I can ever do to help promote this thing, be sure to let me know. I'm a Bitcoin Cash maximalist, and I really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Bitcoin Cash?
Sorry?
Use Bitcoin Cash.
Absolutely. Use Bitcoin Cash.
I find something to use it all the time. I try and do things to scare away restaurants by making them receive Bitcoin. Those people will have remembered last week I went out to a dinner in London. I offered They'd first double the bill if they'd take Bitcoin Cash. So went out in France and did the same. So sometimes people take it, sometimes people don't, but they certainly talk about it and remember it afterwards. Even if they don't take the extra and still want credit card and fiat, all of them remember Bitcoin Cash after you've just offered. I think the maximum I've gone to is 10 times the meal.
That's what it's about. Just continue talking about it, get the message out there. So I shall definitely do that. One of the reasons I have this podcast, I mean, it is liberty focused, but over the last few months, it's become focused primarily on Bitcoin. I feel like Bitcoin is synonymous with liberty and prosperity, bringing empowerment to the entire world.
If we don't have financial freedom, we don't have freedom. It's very simple.
Well said. Well said. Well, once again, Craig Wright, you are a scholar. You are a brilliant man, a polymath of the highest caliber, and I appreciate the hash out of what you're doing. And I look forward to checking out more of your brilliant interviews and controversial discussions on Twitter. Everyone, follow Professor Faustus if you want entertainment, if you want to learn about what's really going on in the crypto world. Until next time, Doctor, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Peace out.
Thank you.
God bless. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The Doctor. Wow, that was one powerful podcast. I think we went a good deal. I think almost 1.5 hours there. Very, very pertinent information. We covered pretty much almost all of the questions I had there, and we got into the technical stuff, the economic stuff, and got to see Craig Wright's personality shine through. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Comment. I'm definitely going to have the comments enabled. Now, I know there are going to be a lot of trolls out there that want to say the typical things in regards to Craig Wright, but bring it on. I think the more people talk about this, the better. I don't believe in any kind of negative publicity, so anything you can do if you want to give this a thumbs down or a thumbs up, be sure to do so. Tell your mom, tell your friends, tell your girlfriend, tell your geeks, but get the word out there. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to check out this podcast, it is on iTunes. It's on Stitcher. I'll be posting this, obviously, on YouTube, on Steemit. Even though I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, I'm all about the Steemit. That's another great platform. But ladies and gentlemen, until next time, peace out, keep it real. Let us know what you think. This is the Crucial Journey podcast. And we have some other great guests lined up in the next coming weeks. I'm going to be getting the Cock. It's not as inappropriate as you think. I'm making reference to Adam Kakesh, my favorite libertarian, running for presidency, or not president, as he likes to put it. We got that interview coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm going to be getting some other great guests that are all tied to the liberty movement. I hope to be interviewing Lynn Ulbricht. Never get that name pronounced properly. If you have any suggestions, be sure to throw it at me. I want to make this podcast a home for liberty, a home for technology, and a home for philosophy, enlightenment, trying to be the greatest version of yourself and striving to be all that you can be. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a very long end. But ladies and gentlemen, peace out, keep it real, don't drive and text. This is the Esoteric Noetic, a.k.a. Chris Schul, a.k.a. the Bitcoin MC, signing out. Ow!
Told me that it can't be done, but I told you the battle was over before the game was done. Now if you think that I'm gonna let you run my body, my heart, and my mind, then you better listen, son. Oh, you think you're invaluable, yeah, act like you made gold, then you're gonna soar like a bird beyond impossible. I think it's plain to see, you know you're meant to be on swords to world substitute. Gotta think and stop. What you want, ain't always what you get. You don't do the work that you won't find your best. You won't work it, you gon' pay the price. You won't work it, gon' pay the price. You won't work it, gon' pay the price. You won't make it.